Here's what it comes down to with ethics. It's all about the categorical imperative. It's all about, what if everybody did that? Is that going to make things better, or is that going to make things awful? If you want to be evil, go be evil, fine. But don't do evil by accident. And the way you avoid doing evil by accident is by sort of thinking through, well, what if things go wrong? What if somebody was going to use this as a weapon?
Hi all, and welcome to Muko's Corner. Muko's Corner is a show about leading a life that feels more you in both your life and tech career. I'm your host, Mayuko, and invite you to come on in, sit down, as usual, grab something warm or hot to drink, and enjoy the show. Today on the show, we have Mike Lee. Mike Lee is an engineer, mentor, speaker, and organizer. From Honolulu, Hawaii, to Silicon Valley, to Amsterdam, with projects ranging from Delicious Library and Tap Tap Revenge to Obama '08 and Appsterdam. His presentations have stretched the bounds of what can be presented at tech conferences, and his no BS business advice has influenced makers and entrepreneurs around the world. So, hi Mike, how are you doing? How's your week been?
Oh, my week has been very busy. I just got stung by a wasp, so that's one to check off my list.
Oh goodness. Are you okay? Everything good there? Like you don't have any allergic reactions or anything?
I happen to have a Benadryl in my bag, so I took that and I should be fine. But if I fall asleep in the middle of the interview, it's not because you're boring, it's the wasp.
Okay, got it. I'll look up Amsterdam 911 and maybe call and be like, yo, my podcast guest, he's out. And I don't know where he is, but he's somewhere in Amsterdam. I hope everything turns out okay with the wasp sting.
I'm sure it'll be fine.
Yeah. Well, I'm so excited to talk to you today. We were saying before the show, this is probably the first time that I've talked to you one-on-one, like in this kind of synchronous environment. I've been a fan of yours for a long time because I think 360 iDev 2015 was my very first ever like tech conference, my very first iOS conference that I went to. And you gave a talk there. And you gave many talks at many other conferences that I've been to, and it's always been life-changing. Like you said in your bio, like you really do change the bounds of like what can be given at tech conference talks, and I feel like your talks are the kinds of talks that I wish I saw more at tech conferences. It's a lot about ethics. It's a lot about technology. It's a lot of, I think the one that I saw most recently, maybe, I think it was at AltConf, was about Mars terraforming, and I was like an hour ago, we were talking about how to build table views and why storyboards aren't bad. And now we're talking about Mars terraforming. So I've always been a huge fan of your talks, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Today on the show, I kind of wanted to throw some deep questions about life and tech and the world and the universe at you, because these are questions that have been brewing in my mind for years, but have really kind of surfaced up. So just for some background, I think, like I started my YouTube channel as a way to kind of like help people into the tech industry, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds, and kind of like really use it as like a playground for myself also to think about like what impact do I want to have on the world? What message do I want to give or have people consider who are coming into the tech world? What are things that people aren't talking about? And in that process, it's been a lot of this kind of like what is technology? Why do we have technology? Like what makes good technology? And so that's been in my brain for a long time, just because I think around that time too, around 2016, 2017 was when the elections were happening in the States, Cambridge Analytica, a lot of this stuff about like Facebook is maybe bad. Maybe we shouldn't rely so heavily on social media kind of stuff. Those conversations were coming up. And so this conversation is not super new, nor is it uncommon. Everybody who uses any sort of technology always thinks about this stuff. But you've given talks to engineers about it. So I think actually let's start somewhere a lot easier than this, and we'll kind of start leaning into that in a little bit. But Mike, you've been a software engineer for a long time, and you've been making apps, iOS apps specifically, and kind of been in this tech community and tech industry. So I kind of wanted to ask first, like, Mike, why do you like coding, and what is it about technology that like interests you and keeps you in the industry? Like, why do you keep choosing to be here, and what is it that you know keeps you excited about making stuff like this?
Well, I mean, I don't really like coding any more than I like writing. You know what I mean? It's like it hurts my hands, it hurts my head, it hurts my relationships. I mean, it's, you know, it's like any other kind of art. Sometimes it really feels like torture, but it also feels like there's kind of something inside that needs to come out. And, my job is really about having empathy for people and empathy for machines. And so I have to learn to speak the language of the people and the language of the machine. And that's what coding ultimately is. And so it's what we put up with. It's ugly, it's awkward, and just like human language. But it's what we have if we're going to understand each other and if we're going to, help each other. Or at least, seek help in the form of technology. As for what technology is, it's kind of in the term itself, it's the art of science. It's basically how we take the knowledge that we've gained about the universe and sort of apply that, cash in that science and with some engineering and get us some cool stuff that we call technology. Like fire was technology back in the day, right? It's all about that application of knowledge and a better understanding. It's all about like figuring out ways that we can sort of put our hands on reality and shift it around and what we can make out of that.
Yeah, that's very poetic. I like that you talk a lot about coding as almost as an art form. Basically, it's a method of self-expression. It's a way. It's not the end all be all. It's a tool to help you get things out into the world, to create new things, to lift humanity to new heights. Also, hearing that you don't like coding is also very it makes me feel good, because I also don't like coding, and a lot of people are always just like, but you're a software engineer. I'm like, yeah, I don't like coding, but I like the stuff that it makes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, great. I thank you for sharing that. Now let's just kind of get into it. So this whole thing about technology, I think, like, we've labeled ourselves as the tech industry, but really it's a lot about creating software is what it is. It's the software tech industry, because I don't know. I just think about, like, technology is not a new concept. Like you said, fire was technology back in the day. Wheels were technology back in the day. Electricity, anything that agriculture really is technology as well. And so, like, the way that we think about technology has definitely changed over millennia. And just our current definition is stuff like TikTok and Uber and DoorDash and stuff like that. But I think, like, one of the things that really interests me is, like, how do you make good technology? Like, what even is good, quote unquote, technology, I guess? When we look back at, like, past inventions and innovations, it's like, yeah, it was good. Like, food helped us to heat our bodies and also, like, cook food. And it was, like, this whole new thing that unlocked us to develop bigger brains and kind of make our own civilizations. And agriculture also unlocked that as well. But we're right in the middle of this software tech industry, and we're seeing, I think, especially in the last 5 years, the bad come out of it. I've heard a lot about just, like, us as technologists, sort of, and especially in the software tech industry, can be kind of naive about how technology can be used, and how, like, the best case scenario is what is thought about when we create it, but, like, we sometimes don't think about the worst case scenario. So, like, what do you think about that? I know it's a very big question, but I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
I think that there is a lot of pressure and money basically behind giving software engineers the idea that, one, stop calling yourself an engineer, you're just another person that we pay to do things. We want to deprofessionalize you. We want to take your pride away from you, because an engineer has to stick by ethics, right? And they don't want us to think about ethics. They want us to do what we're told and build what they want us to build and not get in their way. And when we stop and say, okay, well, what if things don't go to plan? Or, what about the fact that every tool is also a weapon? What can we do to ameliorate that? It just irritates them. I once had a VC type tell me that an engineer is like a dog, and if they bark too loud, you just pull on the chain and choke them off. And it's like, that's not how you treat an engineer nor a dog. But that's how some people think. And that's what we have to sort of fight against when we take the ownership of what we do, when we take the pride and the responsibility for what we do, when we have honor with what we do. That's when we consider things like ethics. And ultimately, even though it irritates them, it's not just about being a goody two-shoes. Doing this kind of analysis actually ends up saving a lot of time and money and trouble down the road, because ethics basically is what protects us from criminal negligence.
This whole kind of concept too of ethics, because, like, I went to, like, a 4-year university and studied computer science, and, like, the school that I went to, and specifically the program that I was part of, was just like, we should practice ethics in engineering, regardless of if it's computer science or if it's structural engineering or mechanical engineering, aerospace engineering. And I think education programs are different now because at the time when I took the ethics classes that I need to, it was like trolley problem. What happens if you're standing on a cliff and there's another person that's hurling at you and only one of you can survive? Are you supposed to get out of the way? Like, it was very unapplicable. But can you talk to me a little bit more about this kind of like engineering ethics? Because like, I think a lot about, if we are the people bringing certain ideas and concepts and functionality and products and services to life, even if it's someone else's idea, we have the responsibility of making it into a thing, right? And so if our responsibility lies there, then we also have a responsibility to make it well and also make sure that like these are things that are, I don't know if net positive is like a naive way to say it, but we have a responsibility towards the things that we create, right? And so like how can we think about ethics as engineers? Like what do you like where lies the responsibility, I guess? Like are we I know that like that whole like the analogy you gave of just like engineers are dogs like rings me to my core, because it's like there are organizations that really make you feel that way, and as soon as you say something about like maybe we shouldn't make this, and like we could replace you with someone who will make it. And so it's a very interesting, I don't know, like double-sided coin sort of situation of like we're so empowered as engineers and yet we actually don't have any power at all.
Well, the thing is, I mean, we do have power in a certain sense, but it kind of depends on, like, I mean, what is power? Power is the collection and distribution of treasure, period. End of story. And so we facilitate that. We can get in the way of that. The last time I had an ethical dilemma, it was a question of, opt-in versus opt-out. And I just went ahead on my own time and just made the thing that you would have to make so that they would have to, actually tear out the ethical stuff if they wanted to be that way, so that they couldn't even say that like, oh, well, we didn't want to like spend that extra time or money. Like they would actually have to go through the effort. Like I once heard that somebody had the idea that instead of a nuclear suitcase, the nuclear codes would be actually in somebody's body, and the president would actually have to cut somebody open and murder them in order to get the nuclear codes, because that's how dire the situation would have to be to warrant that kind of action. And that sounds ridiculous until you have a president who you kind of wish maybe had, some more checks and balances, right? I mean, here's what it comes down to with ethics. It's all about the categorical imperative. It's all about, what if everybody did that? Is that going to make things better, or is that going to make things awful? And fundamentally, if you wouldn't want somebody to do it to you, I mean, and it's not even about the golden rule, because the golden rule sort of assumes that you know it's good for somebody else, or that they would want what you would want. And the point is, leave people alone. And if you're going to bother people, then you better have a darn good reason, and they'd better be willing to participate. Like we have one basic thing that we need to keep in mind, and that is informed consent. Does the person actually understand what is going to happen to them, and are they actually okay with that? And that's on us, not on them. It's not a matter of showing them some 30-page document and saying, click this to get what you're after. It's a matter of, if push comes to shove, whose fault is it if they didn't understand? It's our fault. If they didn't know what they were getting into. If you want to be evil, go be evil, fine. But don't do evil by accident. And the way you avoid doing evil by accident is by sort of thinking through, well, what if things go wrong? What if somebody was going to use this as a weapon? And that kind of analysis is how you end up with things like, oh, I don't know, not letting somebody type the same, thing into a form 3 times, right? So that somebody can't just sit there and, use your API in some kind of weaponized way. Like just putting some basic constraints on things that you might not think about, because all of your energy has been trying to get people to come in, and you haven't put any thought into how do you keep the other kind of people out. And if you don't, what kind of effect that's going to have, et cetera. So it's that kind of, enemy thinking. Like the best way to make a great system is to also create the anti-system and sort of set those two things against each other. And that's kind of what, what ethical thinking is about. It's just sort of like, well, let me think about being evil for a second. Let's not assume everybody has good intentions. Let's actually think about it and design things against that. It just makes good software. It's just good engineering sense.
Yeah, definitely. I like how you talked about like, okay, think about the best case scenario, but also think about the worst case scenario, like be the good guy and the bad guy, because at the end of the day, for something as well distributed as software where like anybody anywhere can use it for the most part, there are like so many different kinds of people are going to use it that you can't assume where that person is coming from or what their level of understanding is. And so you have to meet everybody where they are, I feel like is what it is.
Yeah.
Because like there are some arguments of just like, oh, well, we should make everybody more technology literate. There should be classes or there should be education and early childhood education about getting people to really understand how like certain systems work and how software works. And I don't know, to them, to that, I'm just like, are you going to teach kids what dark patterns are and how to look out for them? Because
like any plan that is based on changing human behavior is a plan that is destined to fail. You know, I always tell people like the number one rule of business is that stop coming up with ideas and putting them into the market. You're just wasting your time. Look for the places where people are spending time and money and find a way for them to spend less time and less money. And then it's just a matter of convincing them that you're not, you know, full of crap, and they'll definitely, you know, buy into that. They'll just give you a cut of what they're saving, basically. I mean, that's all it is.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I feel like that's a really important, like almost product philosophy of just like, it's not, don't find problems and solve them. Find the problems where people are already spending time and money and make it better for them.
Yeah, look at what people are doing. Don't assume that people are somehow going to change. They're going to learn how to use this thing. Like, oh, and then tomorrow everybody's going to be doing, you know, some other thing. And it's like, they're probably not. They're going to just be doing what they're doing, except they're going to be doing it in sort of the lowest energy way that they can, just like the rest of nature.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's really fascinating. So, I mean, the fact of the matter is there are a lot of software engineers out there already who, I don't know. One of the things that I think about is just like the fact that software engineers are just, you know, people who are writing code, making product services and stuff. There's just been such a strong emphasis on like, it's the technology, it's the coding, it's the programming language, it's all of that that's important to software and stuff. And like more and more as time goes by, there is this argument of just like, yeah, but it's the soft skills, it's the behavioral skills. Like you also just need to be not a bad person and pleasant to work with in order to be a good software engineer. But like, I feel like another part of that is like, if you're going to make software, if you're going to make stuff for other people, I feel like it's important to know other people better. Like it's almost like sometimes I'm like, maybe we should all like, in order to become a software engineer, maybe this is a very like extreme example, but like maybe we should all take many anthropology and sociology classes.
Well, that's actually what I ended up doing, you know. Like
really? Oh, no way.
I went to the University of Hawaii, a 4-year university, and my plan was to actually be a doctor. And so I matriculated as a biology major, and then the College of Arts and Sciences basically said, no, you don't get credit for being a good scientist as a doctor. Being a scientist is a given. If you want to stand out as a doctor, you have to understand people. So you need to go study anthropology, sociology, linguistics, learn all about people. And that's what's going to make you a great doctor. And I didn't end up becoming a doctor, but as an engineer, it's the exact same situation. The only thing I use from computer science is like, algorithmic efficiency calculations. Other than that, it's mostly just interesting, just like the rest of that kind of, mathematics, right? But like, software engineering is really much more about understanding how people work and the power dynamics of people and what's going on in the world and what you're affecting and how you're affecting it and where that money's coming from. And, it's about basically, manipulating the fabric of reality as we know it. I mean, the question of why everything suddenly is about software is because we've gotten hardware to the point where it's mostly just universal and all we have to do is talk to it and then it will do more or less what we want. And that's what software is. And then once we can do that at sort of like the molecular level with nanomachines or whatever, then that's kind of like the apotheosis of what we do. But it's really all about understanding reality and particularly reality as it relates through workflows, and then manipulating those workflows the way that you manipulate enzyme channels in a cell to make the cell do this or that. So we're sort of this low-level machinery of the larger mechanism that we're all a part of.
Yeah, it's like we as people who write code think that our systems and our code ends where a computer ends, but in reality, it actually far extends that, where we need to be thinking about the world as our system. Like you said, like how do things play into each other? Who's funding the money? Like what's going on? What are the different constraints against different kinds of people and different societies? And how does your piece of work play into that? And how does it? And really, that's the part that we own. of just like we are part of a bigger system. Actually, it's not just the code that we write. And so thinking about all of that. So when you were at university, like, was that one of the like the requirements of just like being bio, of just like you have to take these classes too?
Well, so, pre-med was a curriculum. So it was basically a list of science and math classes you had to take. So like I had to take organic chemistry, for example, which was a lot of fun because you got to basically see that, molecules are just sort of like three-dimensional Lego, and you can just kind of snap them apart and put them back together using various algorithms that we call reactions. And you can just sort of manipulate reality at that level too. And we sort of simulate that with a bunch of switches, in a transistor set and a CPU and in a computer that we call a phone for some reason.
Yeah, for sure. So like, I don't know. A lot of what I think about is just like, yeah, maybe we should. I think about going back to school because I'm just like, I need to like learn more about people if I'm ever gonna make stuff that actually serves people. But I mean, I'm not saying that I'm like unique or special or anything like that, but I'm not sure.
But you are unique and special, right? We are all unique and special. That's why there's so
true
many
in our
of us.
own individual way. Yeah, that's very true. Sometimes I wonder if we all had done that. Of course, like hindsight's 2020. There's many other universes in which we have actually done that. How the world would be different if as software engineers, as people who fully own and are responsible for the creations that we put out into the world, if we just understood people better, how would software be different?
I think that if we just realized that we're all just individual parts of one greater thing, and that it's not about sort of me versus you, us versus them, but we're sort of all in this together, and so anything where I win and everybody else loses is not really going to be a good solution, because the big picture is kind of the real picture. And having sort of the humility to see yourself as one part of something much greater, and serving that much greater purpose, rather than just being just sort of like this one selfish actor. Fundamentally, if you don't care about the people that you pass when you walk down the street just because you don't know them, then you're not going to worry so much if what you're doing is stealing money from them or ruining their lives or messing up their relationships. But if you actually try to feel compassion for every single living person, no matter how awful you might think that they are, you can actually learn something. And that doesn't mean just, going out there, like I'm no idiot, right? I have a hard effing life. I know every awful thing that there is out there. And, at the end of it, the only thing that I have left is that it hasn't made me awful. I just absolutely refuse to ultimately go out and just say, F it, everybody sucks, hit the big red button that destroys reality, F enlightenment. Like, no, I'm just not willing to do that. And so, when I, for example, look at a situation and I say, well, if I don't do anything, then people are going to die or be hurt or whatever, then somehow that's partially my responsibility, and if I get hurt in the process, then that's just part of it. Maybe that's why I'm here,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. How do you think, like, this is like a big question, but how do you think people can become more compassionate? How do you think people can develop empathy for others? Like, I feel like that's one of the hardest things to teach other people, but it is one of the most important things to learn. So like, for someone who wants to cultivate something like that, how can they do that?
So I think that this is very important because I've actually seen, I've seen a psychopath try to code, and it's almost impossible because a psychopath cannot figure out what the machine is talking about. Right? Mm-hmm. The psychopath is not able to imagine themselves from another perspective. They're sort of stuck in their, in their one self. They can't sort of four-dimensionally put themselves into somebody other's body and just kind of imagine for a second what it might be like to be them. And that's the fundamental exercise. And that's not a thing that you're born with or not born with. That's just an idea that somebody came up with. It's just a meme that we have that we can do on purpose through thought. Right? If you can think about how the computer is willing to, execute what it is that you want it to do, if you can think about, tracing a tree through some thousands of recursive instructions, blah, blah, blah. I mean, the stuff that we do, it's easy enough to think about how somebody else might feel or what it might be like. I mean, when I listen to podcasts and I hear about something awful happening to somebody or even something great happening to somebody, I really try to inhabit that. I really try to close my eyes and sort of picture that and sort of feel that pleasantness or unpleasantness. And in doing so, I learn to not only suffer for others, suffering, but also to take joy in others' joy. And so, I no longer feel schadenfreude. If somebody falls down, I don't laugh. I just feel bad for them. And, especially bad if I could have done something to prevent it and didn't. And if somebody feels joy, I don't feel jealous. I'm just happy for them. Because again, to me, it's like we're all on the same team, and we're as capable of being in tune with each other's emotions as we are of ignoring or canceling them out.
Yeah, it's an interesting time to live in right now too, especially because it feels a lot like there's this kind of tension between individuality versus community or like collaborative effort kind of stuff, especially with COVID. Coming from like I'm Japanese American, and so Japanese cultures are incredibly community based or very, it's not me, it's all of us versus
right.
And obviously this is an extreme, and America is very individualistic. It's me over others, and so it's an interesting time in which like we're all forced to really reckon with like, how do we actually get through something like this together? Is it by prioritizing ourselves, or is it by prioritizing others?
Yeah, so like I am in this exact same situation. I'm also Japanese American. My family name is actually Murai. And, it's the same thing like here in the Netherlands where I live. It's very much, I feel, where they're trying to strike this balance between capitalism and socialism, not as an either or, but as sort of like the yin and yang that are in this kind of opposition with each other. And we see that too much of one or the other just becomes, untenable. And so it really is finding that balance. And what I have found, for myself most recently, and I think that, I see sort of as the problem in most people, you have to learn how to truly love yourself. And once you truly love yourself, then the love for others flows from the love of self. And so many of us are in this kind of people-pleasing mode where we feel like we either have to, think of ourselves exclusively, or we have to somehow put everybody ahead of us. But there's actually a third solution where you love yourself the most, and then it all sort of flows out from there. And then, you don't have to love everybody the same. There's 7.5 billion of us. You can love somebody the least, but it has to start with yourself, and it has to go from there. Because if you are exhausting yourself in order to give to others, you're going to eventually run out of energy and either become broken or cynical. And then people are just going to point to you and say, see, if it were simply a matter of knowing what the perfect thing to do is and then doing it, then all of this would be easy. But computing is all about having a limited amount of resources and having to make compromises between all kinds of different things that we're trying to accomplish. And that goes inside the computer as well as outside the computer. And that's true of everything in nature. Everything is limited. Everything has only a certain capacity. Everything has only so much attention to give. And that's why, things are hard. And that's what we as engineers and as people have to constantly be sort of striking, as a balance. But at the end of the day, it has to be this kind of serial connection and not this either or situation.
Yeah, definitely. If you don't mind me asking a personal question, kind of this whole self-love thing. How are you able to find self-love? Because you mentioned you've been through a lot of shit.
I think it came from during this pandemic. I did so much in terms of like, I really wanted to be very active and I wanted to make the most of my time. And so I ended up taking a lot of hobbies. And that included like, a lot of baking and cooking and stuff. And so I was like producing a lot of, stuff for people. And I really kind of started to take notice of sort of how much I felt appreciated or not appreciated by certain people, and how much people were sort of valuing me or not valuing me. And then I kind of started realizing, well, how much am I valuing myself? And then I kind of started like, thinking in terms of that, and like, what do I actually want right now? What do I actually feel, good about? And, obviously I can, go on top of that and say, okay, well, yes, that's what I want, but that would be, a very dickish move because I also want these people to still respect me tomorrow. So the compromise is, but it starts with, knowing what you actually want. And a lot of that comes down to like, you care about the stuff that you care about. And like, you might as well admit that. You might as well put that forward, and if somebody says, well, like, why can't it be my way? It's like, well, why should it be your way? Why should it be anybody's way? Right? Like we all have our particular way, and you kind of realize, and I think this is really what it comes down to. The problem is when you let your light shine, when you just you just be yourself, your actual unfiltered self, then there are other people who are going to be like, oh my God, your light is blinding me. Please turn it down. And you're going to feel embarrassed and ashamed. And you're going to want to, turn that down and not be yourself and conform to how you think people want you to be. But what you don't understand is that beyond those are the dozens, the thousands who see your light shining, and that's giving them permission, for their light to shine. Like, I'm definitely not the first person to say that, but that is 100% the reality of things. And that is what it really comes down to, is just being like, I am going to authentically be myself, and anybody who has a problem with it that is their problem. And it doesn't mean that I can't improve. I'm improving myself every day. That's the catch. When everybody says be yourself, what they mean is you can't fake it. Be yourself, and if yourself sucks, then work on that. Right? Learn ethics, learn how to play the guitar, learn how to process your emotions, and be yourself. But really be yourself. Don't be fake. That's not going to get anybody anywhere.
Yeah, definitely. It's such a hard thing to be honest with yourself, to be yourself. And some people, I think, have a difficulty figuring out, like, what is myself? Like, who is me? But I feel like when you start, it's literally like layers of an onion. When you start peeling back, you start to see who you are, and you'll see the good and the bad. Similar to just like having responsibility for the stuff you make. I think there's a responsibility you have to yourself to face the great parts and the terrible, absolute, like, bad parts of yourself. But figuring out what those things are and realizing what your constraints are, like you've kind of like analogized many times, like if you think of yourself almost like a system, if you're working in that kind of mode of just like, here are the certain things that I have to work with, here's problems that there are, I have to work on those things, let's identify them, let's figure out what resources I have. I feel like that's when the real magic happens. And so be yourself to me is just like, I don't know, it feels so much more like, that phrase is very like, it's like, oh, if I just exist, I am myself. But in reality, I feel like there's just so much more work. It's more just like I don't know, become yourself maybe is a more apt
be the best version of yourself, really.
Yeah, definitely.
Because
yeah.
at the end of the day, you're not a fixed thing, and if you declare yourself to be a fixed thing, you're going to pretty much immediately stop being that thing. Like, you have to see yourself as this kind of ongoing project. And if you say, well, I mean, I did that, but I'm not a bad person, it's like, well, obviously you are a bad person because you did a bad thing, right? Like, you are the things that you do. And if you take responsibility for yourself, the things that you say, the things that you do, and how those have, effects on other people, whether you intended them to or not, I mean, that is also a part of self-love.
Yeah, definitely. I think a part of like this whole kind of like, how do you face bad stuff, whether that's within you or within society? I feel like sometimes that invokes fear too, because it is scary to look at the dark parts about reality. So like, how do you think others can like face that fear? Because I think it inherently takes courage to look at those things, because it is a lot easier to look at the good things and the bright shiny things in life. But in order to make good things, in order to be responsible for those things, you have to look at those bad things. So how can people address the fear? I think
fear comes from dishonesty, honestly, because once you're dishonest, then you're afraid that people are going to find out that you're dishonest, and then you have that fear. And I think that is what everything ultimately boils down to. Obviously, there's like the fear of death, etc., right? But I think even the fear of death is, to a certain extent, the fear of not having lived an honest life, I think that, like, the way that you deal with fear is to shine a light on it and to see what it is, because the unknowing is always going to be worse than the actual thing itself. Because as awful as it is what it is, and you can deal with it. You can start to wrap your mind around it. But when you don't know what it is, then it becomes basically everything that it could be, and that's so much worse. And not only that, but every bit of energy you expend into dealing with the everything that it could be is not really going into dealing with the thing that it actually is. And so you're much better off just, facing that fear, sort of head on. And if, there's something you can do about it, then great, and you can get started. And maybe you need to ask for help, and maybe you need to, admit some things, and maybe you need to let some things go, whatever it is. But you're not going to be able to move forward, and ultimately being stuck is going to be worse than, whatever it is you're going to have to go through to get to the other side in, I think, almost all situations.
Yeah, definitely. I only read like Russian literature in high school and stuff, but it reminds me of just like Russian literature. A lot of is just like human. Being human is suffering. Everything is about suffering. Everything sucks and everything's bad. But maybe, and I used to think like, oh my gosh, that's such like a pessimistic, negative way of looking at life. But in reality, I feel like the lesson that it I'm taking away from it now is just like, yeah, like there is bad parts and there is a lot of suffering, but it's much better to face it and to deal with it and work through it and recognize it than to ignore it completely.
Yeah.
I think when like as I get older and older and I know myself better, I realize how important it is to my health to be authentic and honest with myself. Just because it was so easy to not be that way, I think, like especially when you're younger and you care about what other people think and you're a minority or you stick out in some way, whatever that might be. But it's just like, I don't know, I think in order to be authentic and honest, it's not always going to be daisies and butterflies. It's sometimes going to be death and wretched, terrible things.
Oh,
but
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But then it's like, otherwise it's just a hidden festering wound. It's like something bad isn't going to go away just because you don't admit that it's there.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so tying this back again to kind of the software engineering thing too. Maybe, I don't know if most people have experienced this, but I think there comes a certain point in every software engineer's life of just like, this feels bad. This feels like not the right thing to do. I feel like leadership, product management, whoever else is deciding certain things, it just doesn't feel good. Maybe it's another engineer or something like that. And I think like some people find their courage and speak up, and sometimes good things happen. Sometimes people speak up and nothing happens at all. Other people are just afraid because they have a lot to lose for speaking up and stuff. But I think one of the core parts to all of that is some software engineers definitely work on very dire things that are a matter of life and death. Like if you work in the defense industry, if you work on like health tech sort of stuff, like definitely people can die as a result of your work. But there are a lot of us, myself included, who don't work on things that feel as dire. I think social media is a really good example of just like, at the end of the day, a lot of people can argue that it's just like, I'm connecting one person to another. What's so bad in that? But then things happen like election tampering and stuff like that, right? So like, how can people who work in situations that don't feel dire understand the weight of their work when nobody else does? How can they work through that, I guess? Like if you encounter that sort of situation where you're just like, I should say something, but I don't know if it's even warranted to say.
I think that
what should they do?
For me, I always try to approach things from a place of understanding. I want to know, if this thing seems wrong to me, then why are all of these people going along with it? What's actually going on here? And I think that in trying to pursue that, and in trying to understand, I've unraveled whole companies just by not understanding what the heck it was they were building and then asking everybody until it turned out that nobody understood what the heck they were building, and everybody thought that everybody else knew what they were building, and they weren't building anything. And, if you actually get it to the point where somebody kind of does take ultimate responsibility for it, or tells you, stop asking questions or whatever, then you have your answer. And then you sort of have to ask yourself, what is this situation here? Is this something where I'm in mortal danger and I need to get away? Or is this basically a responsibility that I didn't deserve, but that has been put into my lap, right? It's like if you're walking down the street and somebody asks you to take a picture of them with their family, it's kind of a dick move to be like, nah, screw you, like we all kind of agree that that's a nice thing to do. There's no reason why you should do that. It's just kind of, it's your dharma. It's just fallen onto you. And a lot of times those are the problems that get sent our way, whether they're happening at work or whether they're happening out in the world. All of a sudden, it seems like it or not, this problem has been put in front of me. And because I'm the only one here who seems to be able to do something about it, maybe that means that it falls to me to do something about it. And, make sure that you kind of again, check in with yourself first, check in with your partner, your number two, your best friend, your boss, your whoever it is, and go from there. Document everything for what it's worth. Evidence is always better than hearsay. And, even if there's nothing else you can do, just document things. For example, I'm obviously much more sensitive to like racial things, especially Asian things that people say. And sometimes, people will say something that I think is a little inappropriate, and I might, take a screenshot of it, and then maybe I'll go talk to them, or maybe I'll bring it up or whatever, and I'll just keep track of those reactions because, first of all, later on, I want to be able to go back and look at them for myself because half the time they're not half as bad as I thought that they were in retrospect. So there's also that. But also times it's like I just want to see, maybe there's a pattern established or something like that. Like you just never know. It's the same thing as like, if you're going to go somewhere that you don't usually go, tell somebody that you're going in case something happens to you, right? It's like the same basic idea. Make sure you check in with people, that kind of a thing. I think that's the best sort of basic framework of what to do when you find yourself in a situation where you don't think that, that things should be happening. And, I can't necessarily say that you should do, what I would do because, I think we've seen the consequences of, me sometimes taking that stand. But at the same time, I don't look back with regret on those times that I did the right thing, no matter how much it cost me.
Yeah, and the right thing looks different for everybody, for sure. But I think doing your due diligence, documenting things, trying to empathize with other people, checking in with yourself, I feel like is one of the best things that you can do when you get into those situations.
Get some sleep. That's another one. Definitely get a good night's sleep before you do make any decisions. You know what I mean? There's also that.
Yeah. Definitely. That's great advice. Well, hey, Mike, I know we're coming up to the end of the time. Thank you so much for being on the show. Where can people find you online to follow you, to hear about your talks, to watch your talks? Where can they get
Sure. If you go to my website, that's murmurs, like mur.mu.rs, or lemurs, which is le.mu.rs. Either one will get you to my content.
Awesome. If y'all are ever looking for some incredibly thought-provoking talks, then definitely check out literally any and all of Mike's talks because I will promise you will not regret it. You can also listen to this episode of the Muko's Corner podcast by checking it out on your favorite podcasting app of your choice. All right. Thank you so much, Mike, for being on the show today, and thank you all for listening.